Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Sona was Issei fiance? Part 5. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei and his peerage spent the rest of the day exploring the Gremory mansion, once he calmed down from seeing his family. After they finished their tour, Issei and his peerage decided to enjoy the nice weather by spending some time in the garden. Milika's wanting to spend time with Issei and Keko since he hadn't seen the two in a while, followed them excitedly telling them about how things had been for him. When Surziches finally arrived, he had to take a picture as he smiled to himself. Issei and Milika's had coaxed Grafia into taking the rest of the day off and just spending time with them. After finding them in the garden, Surziches was extremely happy with the sight. Grafia was leaning against a large oak tree with Milika's in her lap. He had fallen asleep so his head was on her shoulder, but facing Issei who was sprawled out on the grass next to the two also napping. Grafia had one arm wrapped around her youngest holding him close, as her other carded through her oldest son's hair, a smile gracing her lips. Less than a foot away, and laying in the sunlight was Keko. She had curled up into a ball just like a cat, but even from the doorway, Surziches could hear her contented purring as she sunbathed. A short distance off from the tree was a pergola, under which Issei's Bishop Sophiel and Garen were sitting and drinking tea, talking softly so as not to wake their king. Then around 50 feet off from there in the large open space, Issei's last two peerage members were running laps, both seemingly eager to burn their energy. Softly walking towards his family with a comfortable smile on his face, Surziches gently sat down beside his wife, quickly giving her a peck on the cheek in greeting. She rolled her eyes, but smiled nonetheless. Even though he did have something to talk about with Issei, he decided it could wait as he wrapped an arm around his wife's shoulders and pulled her towards him. An hour later, Riaz, who was asked to find everyone and inform them of dinner being ready, was the one to reluctantly intrude on the scene. Everyone gathered as she led them to the dining room and a pleasant dinner was had. Only once it had finished did Surziches decide to have a chat with his oldest son. "Issei, before you go I need to have a talk with you." He spoke, Issei nodding in response. Zeodicus just told the two to use his study for their chat, already having an idea of what they would be discussing. The moment the door was shut, Surziches asked his son. "Sona and Riaz have told you about the youth meeting, right?" "Yeah, it's in a few days. The three of us and some other high-class devils our age will be special guests. From the way they explained, it seems like it's the devil's equivalent of a graduation ceremony. For the most part. But there's a bit more to it. You could also say it's a gathering of the young nobles of devil society." "Why nobles?" "I mean, yes, Sona told me about how hard it is for the devils to repopulate, but surely there are more high-class devils around our age." Despite expecting the question, Surziches still flinched at it. Sighing, he gave the simple explanation. "It's not that they don't exist, you see, not all clans are open and build relationships like the Gremory and the Citri clans. This meeting is more for the benefit of the heirs of the clans. It allows them to meet the other heirs and start making their own opinions and thoughts about things." "I see, but then why would I be attending? I'm not the heir for the Gremory, that's Riaz." Issei spoke, confusion clear on his face. "There are quite a few reasons for you to attend. 1. So when I announce the return of my oldest son, you are there as proof. 2. So when your engagement with Sona is announced, you are once again there as proof. And 3. Azazel has been invited as a guest and he's bringing Vali. If someone irks him, we'll need you to help calm him down." Surziches tried to explain. "No, I figured that out already. Let me rephrase. How am I attending the meeting then? Am I someone's guest?" About that. Outside of the other Satans and myself, no one can bring a guest outside of their peerage." "Okay then, so I'm attending as Sona's rook." Issei responded, though he had a feeling his father was going to correct him. "Not quite, you see, because of your power it'd be strange for you to attend as part of her peerage. Especially when the others would be sure to look down on you for it. I know we talked about it back when we first found you, but in order for the youth meeting to go smoothly, you'll have to attend as the head to the Lucifuge family." How would that work? Mama is the last living member of the Lucifuge clan, right? The current clan heads and the Devil Council already know about your return. It's the rest of the devils that don't, and the council wants us to make it a flashy announcement. So tomorrow they will be announcing the return of the Lucifuge clan with you as the head. But you'll still need to be on an even playing field with the other youth devils, so after that we're going to try to make the Lucifuge clan part of the pillars. Hearing Surziches' answer, Issei's mind raced, though it didn't take him long to realize why the Devil Council wanted to do things this way. With a sigh, Issei just responded to his father. "Politics are stupid." Privately agreeing with his son, Surziches gave a small smile at the words. The old fools just don't seem to understand that greatness can come from anyone. Their conversation now concluded, the two devils exited the study they'd been using to talk and returned to the others, choosing to enjoy the night. When everything finally settled down and it was time to turn in, Issei made sure to call his human parents back in Kuo. They asked about how his day had been, and he told them about how much everyone enjoyed themselves. Though he glossed over his talk with Surziches, giving them a simplified version. Basically, the Devil Council are too prideful and feel that the clans are superior. Because of that, they want to rub my bloodline in the face of all the non-noble-blooded devils. That's ridiculous. I know, but since they're the ones in charge, that's what's happening. It's politics. Oh my. It's almost midnight. You should probably go to bed already, Ice. We're going to turn in too. Okay. Night mom, night dad. Good night son. But the phone call over, Issei followed his parents' lead and went to bed. The next day. After waking up and doing his normal morning routine, Issei was met by his father and Ajuka. On his way to breakfast. Good morning, Issei. Hello again, Issei. I hope this morning has been good so far. Hi Papa, hi Uncle Ajuka. Surziches and Ajuka smiled at Issei's happy attitude, both hoping he'd still be in a good mood later in the day, after all the attention he'd be getting. Since we're going to announce the return of the Lucifuge clan, we figured it'd be a better idea to do the actual inheritance ceremony now when there's less eyes on you. Ajuka spoke, getting right to the point. Issei nodded his head, saying that sounded like a great idea. So the two Satans directed Issei to kneel. As he did, Ajuka used his magic to summon a ceremonial blade. Tapping it on Issei's shoulders as if he were knighting him, Ajuka spoke. I, Ajuka Beelzebub, with the power granted to me by the title of Satan, hereby grant you Issei Takumi Lucifuge Gremory Haidu the land, wealth, and possessions of the former Lucifuge clan. You may rise. Standing once Ajuka finished speaking, Issei felt a weird swirl of magic centering on his left hand. Glancing at it, he saw a golden streak of light expanding around his pinky. The light dimmed after a moment and revealed a golden ring. Etched into the ring was a symbol Issei didn't instantly know. That signet ring is a ring worn by Lucifuge Rofakale, the original head of the Lucifuge family and one of the most fanatical servants of the original Lucifer. With this, you are now the head of the Lucifuge family. When you're ready, just ask Lord Gremory to show you to the lands you now own. When you've finished exploring there, he'll take you to the Devil Council's meeting hall. Since you'll have the backing of the Gremory and the Citri, you should be able to convince them to make the Lucifuge family into a pillar family rather than one of the extra demon families. Ajuka explained before he and Surziches took their leave. Sighing, Issei continued on into the dining hall to get breakfast. Thanks to the delay from the two Satans, he was the last person to arrive. Luckily, his grandfather knew about things, so he didn't have to say anything about why he was late. Though his peerage was eager to explore, so he quickly ate his meal and had Zeoticus guide him to their new territory. Once they got close enough, Zeoticus began to speak. The clan hasn't had a head since the Devil's Civil War, so the territory was sealed. Now that you've been acknowledged as the new head, you can dispel the barrier. After that, we'll be free to teleport in and out, rather than just to the edge of the land. Thanks, Grandpa. If you want, you can go back and relax until we finish looking around. Nope. After you unseal the place, I plan to have a few servants teleport in to be your new staff. You'll always be welcome in Gremory territory, but this is your land, so you might as well live here while in the underworld. Nodding at Zeoticus's words, Issei stepped forward. Now that he was in front of the group, he raised his signet ring to the barrier. I am the new Lord Lucifuge. I command this barrier to open. He chanted, letting his power flare just a bit. As his power touched the barrier, it trembled before dissipating. Since he was in front, Issei was the first person to set foot in his new territory. After walking through the gate, he was treated to an awe-inspiring sight. Even though the land had been sealed off, everything was still in amazing condition, and the greenery that was the front lawn was still vibrant and full of life. The hedges that lined the road were still smooth and even. In the center of the front lawn was a massive water fountain. Standing on a pedestal in the center of the fountain was a statue carved from ever-frozen ice. The statue being a man with 12 wings surrounding him. His hands were enclasped over the pommel of a very beautiful sword. Said sword seemed to exude magic. Ajuka did mention that the original head of the Lucifuge clan was a fanatical servant to the original Lucifer. Issei mumbled after seeing the statue, his peerage hearing his words with shock outside of Kalwarner, who vaguely remembered the man from her time as a soldier for the fallen angels in the Great War. Not long after that, the servants that Zeoticus was going to have staff the home for Issei arrived and introduced themselves. Well, it's nice to meet you all. I don't really have much to say at the moment since this is as far as I've gotten in looking around. That is alright, sir. If you do have anything you desire to change, please just ask. The head butler responded as he bowed. Nodding his head, Issei said he would let the man know if something came to mind. Well, why don't we go inside now? Baron spoke, eager to see what other magnificent displays of magic he could find besides the statue in the fountain. Agreeing with his bishop, Issei and the others entered the mansion. The foyer was different to what everyone expected. Rather than having two curved staircases leading up to the upper floors, there was one massive set of stairs set across from the entryway. On the first floor alone there were 4 doors. Because they wanted to see every room, Issei's peerage stuck with him as they went to the leftmost door first. It led to a rather large hallway that housed 3 different rooms. The first of which seemed to be set up for an alchemist or an enchanter to use as a workshop. Garen smiled as he claimed the room to be his workspace. The next room they came across was a library. Thanks to the dust covering the books due to the long time spent unoccupied, they couldn't see any titles, though they were at least able to tell how many books there were inside the room. The final room they came to in what they realized to be the western wing was a smithy. The smithy also had access to the front lawn, a walkway leading to a storage shed, which was home to the fuel for the forge and the materials that could be forged. Returning to the entry, the group moved to the eastern wing. Once again there were 3 rooms, one was a massive pantry. The next was the actual kitchen, and the last room was, well, it was a dining room, but it was set up with a bar, so Issei figured it was supposed to be a room for entertaining guests. Backtracking to the entry, Issei led his peerage through the closest of the last 2 doors. The room they had entered was a massive ballroom. The back half of the room was lined with windows and a few doors. On both sides of the room were 2 atriums that the doors lead to. While the back wall housed one set of doors leading to a balcony that overlooked the back half of the property. As they looked around the massive room, the teens noticed that the last door from the entryway also led to the ballroom. They took note of 2 small staircases in the front corners of the room. Taking the closer set of stairs, they discovered that the second floor was a walkway with rails, so you could look down on the party while taking a break from dancing, with several tables and chairs scattered about. There was also a massive set of doors that lead back to the front hall staircase. The second floor of the front hall housed several bathrooms, 2 sets of stairs leading up to a 3rd floor, and doors that lead back into the wings. Exploring the second floor of the west wing, they learned that it was home to what the plaque above the door labeled as the servants' quarters. The second floor for the east wing was home to a sitting room, a study, and a private library that was connected to the study. Moving up to the 3rd floor, they found 24 bedrooms, including the master bedroom and another 6 bathrooms. Since HIATUS told Issei that this was his home, so he might as well use it, Issei called for the head butler, whose name was Sebastian. Sebastian. My peerage and I will be living here while we are in the underworld. Would you have someone bring our things? Of course, as the head of the clan, the master bedroom is mine, but I believe my peerage have already selected their rooms. Right away, sir. I'll just go make the rounds to label the rooms so the others know where to put everyone's belongings. Thank you, Sebastian. With a nod, the butler was off. Using his magic to create a communication circle, Issei contacted his peerage. Alright guys, I'm going to step out for a bit. There's a few more things I need to do as the head of the clan. I should be back shortly. Since his grandfather was still standing beside him after he let his peerage know, all he had to do was turn to the red-headed man and nod. Smiling at his grandson, HIATUS activated his magic and teleported the 2 to the Devil Council's meeting chamber. Because Xerxes wanted Issei to convince the council to make the Lucifuge clan a pillar family, all of the current pillar family heads had to attend the meeting, which meant Issei had to wait outside while his grandfather entered the meeting hall. After around half an hour of waiting, he was allowed to enter. We thank you for appearing before us, Issei. The council has acknowledged you as the head of the Lucifuge family, and we look forward to working with you. The man spoke up, giving a speech that he would give to everyone who claims the title of family head. Issei bowed as thanks for the welcome. He went to open his mouth, but another person spoke up. As we are all well aware of the fact that you are Xerxes' lost son returned, I'd like to ask that you skip the introduction you were likely about to give us. This time it was a woman that spoke, at least if he could tell by the voice. Other than the 4 Satans that were presiding over the meeting, Issei couldn't accurately see anyone well enough to figure out who was speaking. If that is what you wish, then I'll be blunt. I didn't really want to do any of this, I'm just going along with it, since this is politics. You all probably already know that I'm here to ask for the Lucifuge family to be made into a pillar clan. While it is true we knew this, I would like to remind you that manners are still important. Another devil spoke up. Issei just nodded his head at the words. Since this is a matter of status, the pillar clans must put your request to a vote. Should it pass, we the Devil Council are allowed to agree or veto the pillar's decision. But I'll say this right now. If the clans agree, the council has already decided to allow it. But that said, the heads of the pillar clans began speaking and debating it. Of course the Gremory and Citri clans instantly agreed to it. But many more had to agree still. Despite the fact a little less than half of the original 72 pillars remain, 2 yeses was not enough to mean a guarantee. Back and forth a debate went, several others pitching their votes. Within the first 2 minutes of discussion, Issei had the Gremory, Citri, Baal, Belial, and Agar's clans had all voted yes. On the other hand, the Piaman, Barbados, and Salos clans voted no. Really, what reason do we have to add the Lucifuge family to the pillar clans? I mean, there must be a reason they weren't one of the original 72. One of the clan heads spoke, which caused another to sigh. You really are an idiot, Yuval. The Lucifuge family isn't a pillar family because their head wasn't a general in the army, instead being the head of Lucifer's personal guard. Their family duty was to protect Lucifer after all. But why wouldn't he have the family do that now too? Because the Lucifuge family died out after Lord Lucifer's wife married him. Issei is going to revive the family. It's a rebirth for that line. Why should they have to stick with that job? But that last statement made a few more clan heads saw fit to vote, bringing the total vote from 8 to 15. Of which 9 were for allowing Issei to make the Lucifuge family into a pillar clan. The room started to echo as the debate got louder and louder. At least until someone coughed. I say let them be a clan family. The kid's got the power to make it happen. Bella's right. The boy is indeed strong enough. Sure, let's make the Lucifuge family a pillar clan, then when things are put to a vote between the pillar clans, Grimory has a second vote in his pocket. Nonsense. Finally, after 10 minutes had passed, another group of clan heads voted. Out of the 33 clan heads, 22 had voted. 11 saying yes and 11 saying no. You know what? I'm for it. I owe the kid for knocking some sense into my son. The voice spoke out. Are you sure, Lord Phoenix? Normally you'd be vehemently against something like this. I owe the boy. The least I can do is put in a good word. Several others voted with Lord Phoenix at that point. I must remind you all that this issue cannot be considered settled until all votes have been cast. The rule has always been even if the remaining votes cannot change the result, they must be cast. So speak up. The council member spoke up, trying to hurry things along. After that, the last few votes spoke up. In the end, Issei had 21 of the 33 clans agreeing to allow the Lucifuge clan to be a pillar clan. Now then. With the votes cast, the majority agreed to the request. As I have said earlier, the council has already decided that we would grant this request. If it made it this far, that means another congratulations is in order for Lord Lucifuge. The Devil Council welcomes you to the pillars. Hours later. Issei tiredly activated his magic circle to teleport home. After the vote to make the Lucifuge family a pillar clan, Issei was forced to attend the public announcement and then sit through several interviews. After those were done, he was dragged off to a welcoming party, which was really just his grandfather Lord Grimory introducing him to the other pillar clan's head members. It was a whirlwind of events that left the teen longing for bed. As he arrived in his new bedroom, he was greeted with a hug. Apparently Sona's father had been in on the plan and had informed his daughter, so he didn't have to explain anything to her. Sona could tell that Issei just wanted to sleep, so she led him to the bed and started to remove his shoes for him. Please don't make me do anything like that again. Issei spoke out loud, half praying that he and Sona wouldn't have to endure interviews about their relationship after it was publicly announced. I'll try not to. Sona responded as she got herself ready for bed. Issei summoned the last dregs of his energy to at least take his shirt and socks off before flopping back down onto the bed. A couple minutes later, Sona was beside him and he wrapped his arms around her as she snuggled into him. It didn't take much more than 5 minutes for the two to begin drifting off to sleep. After taking over as head of the Lucifuge clan, Issei had very little free time to spend with his friends and family. Despite doing several interviews almost immediately after obtaining the status of a pillar family for the clan, he still had more to do. However, he did have help from his grandfather's HIATUS Grimory in managing things and learning all of the important things he would need to know as a clan head. The only good news is that Issei, his father Serzich's, and soon-to-be sister-in-law, or just sister as she preferred him to call her, Serafo, had convinced the Citri and Grimory heads to delay announcing his engagement to Sona until the Youth Devils Conference. The major reason Issei felt that to be his crowning achievement since becoming head of the Lucifuge family was that it kept the number of interviews down, which meant he spent more time with learning how to lead the Lucifuge as the head of the house than he did in interviews about himself becoming the head of the family. Because it was well known at this point that Issei had heritage from the Grimory clan, no one raised a fuss when Xiaoticus stepped in to help manage the estate, though Lord Citri contributed aid as well, but since they didn't want the underworld to know of their connections just yet, it was kept quiet. Another plus for the teen was that in doing all he could to prepare his house, he figured out a dream he could share and announce at the Youth Devils Conference. Since he had stable connections with the angels and fallen angels, Issei had decided that his goal would be to take over as one of the 4 Satans and follow in Seraphul's footsteps as the head of foreign affairs. So my lord, do you think you're ready for tonight? His head butler Sebastian asked him as Issei stood in the grand entryway, waiting for the females of his peerage to finish their preparations for the night. Since the young devils attending the meeting were all nobles and it was to be held in a very high-class establishment, they were all going in formal wear. Because of the importance of the meeting, Bova was even using his magic to take a fully human appearance. Bova's human form being a more sturdy built version of Garen, but his eyes were similar to Issei's with vertical lizard slit-like pupils. However, Issei's were a nice violet with golden flecks scattered throughout, Bova's were glowing amber in color. His hair was a coppery red, but just a touch brighter, making it look like a slightly more reddish carrot. The three boys were dressed similarly, though each had a few key differences based off their personalities. Nice black leather shoes and black slacks were all that the three had on that matched. Bova was wearing a bright red button-up shirt with the sleeves uncuffed and rolled up. He left the top three buttons undone, showing just a hint of his bare chest, and the collar was folded up. This was the most Issei and the other could get him to agree to when it came to formal wear, as he really didn't like it. Aaron was wearing a more subdued icy blue button-up. Since he actually preferred to dress nicely, he had a nice black jacket on over top, but left open along with just the top button of his shirt undone. A simple yet shiny silver Rolex watch adorned his left wrist. Stuffed nice and neatly inside his suit jacket's chest pocket was a folded-up handkerchief. In Issei's case, he had on a bluish-green button-up shirt with a black vest. He had chosen to go with a silver tie, and a silver pocket watch was placed inside the vest's right-hand pocket. On top of that, to add just a splash of red to represent drag, Issei had a red rose adornment on the left side of his chest, just above his heart. Because it was a warm night, Issei also had his sleeves rolled up, but nowhere near as high as Bova had his rolled up. Issei was also wearing the golden signet ring of the Lucifuge clan on his left pinky like normal. As Issei finished his assessment of himself and his two companions, he finally responded to the older man. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be. I do appreciate your help and concern over this though, Sebastian. Your aid has been extremely helpful, and I'm not sure I'd have managed to get as much done as I have without you. Think nothing of it, my lord. During my tenure as part of the staff in the Gremory home, I was treated as family, and you've done your best to make sure that myself and all of the other staff are treated just as we were before. It is our pleasure to aid you when we can in return for such kindness and friendship." Sebastian replied just in time for Keko, Zophiel, and Kalawiner to descend down the staircase. Issei smiled at them as he took in their dresses. Keko had decided to wear a familiar dress. It was the one she had worn the night that Sona and Issei held their engagement dinner parties with their families. Her hair was also brushed differently than normal. Instead of having two large strands of hair frame her face, they were pulled up and tucked over her forehead in the same direction so as to cause the fringe to partially cover one eye. Zophiel had found a nice halter dress that matched the color of her eyes. Around both wrists she wore silver bracelets. To match her bracelets, Zophiel had used a silver crescent moon-shaped hair clip to hold her long hair up a bit. Instead of letting it lay flat and cascade down her back, she used the silver hair clip to layer her hair so that it gently brushed her shoulders without flaring over them. Because she was comfortable with showing her skin, the former fallen angel wore no other jewelry, letting the open dress accent her form enough to where she could draw attention without the shiny accessories. In Kalwiner's case, she was truly different than normal. Her long flowing navy blue hair was pulled up and braided into several different braids, which wound around each other in such a way that the largest one was in the middle, with 4 smaller ones being wound into it, and then 2 even smaller ones, one on either side of the larger braid. Her normal maroon business suit type outfit was replaced with a form-fitting backless dress that was a vibrant and stunning green in color. "Well then, are we all ready?" he asked as the three finally joined Bova, Garen and I at the front door. Nods and voices of agreement came from everyone, but when they stepped out the door, the group was greeted by Bova's father Tannen. "Good evening, Lord Lucifuge. Since it is a special occasion and I have already met you and your peerage, I was asked to be your escort to the conference." He spoke in a polite tone, with mostly formal wording. That meant he was going along with all the pomp and circumstance of the situation, so Issei had to act accordingly. "I thank you, good sir. Shall we be off then?" He spoke, though everyone around me could tell he was annoyed with the formalities of it all already. Tannen merely nodded his head as he ordered the dragons he had brought with him to allow the young devils on their backs. A short while later saw the teens walking through the entrance to the massive dining room that the Youth Devils Conference would be taking place in. Thankfully for Issei, they arrived at the same time as both Rias and Sona. Sona had on a lovely blue dress that clung to her figure and had no back to it. She had blue flowers, just a touch darker than her dress adorning her hair. The girls of her peerage were all dressed similarly. But Rugel and Shin wore outfits similar to Issei's, though they both were in standard white and black for the color scheme. Rias on the other hand had on the stereotypical black dress. Her queen Akeno wore the same dress only in red. Kiba was dressed similarly to Garen, while Mitsuda and Motohama were dressed more like Bova. As for Gasper, well, he wore a black version of Kaneko's dress, though his skirt was slightly longer than hers. "Well, that's some coincidental timing, would you say, Sona?" Rias spoke as Issei and his peerage approached. Sona couldn't say anything though, Issei stealing her attention with his looks. In her mind she felt that Issei always looked good, but when it came time for formal attire, she would never get used to how handsome he was. Riaz rolled her eyes at her friend's absentmindedness as she greeted her nephew and his peerage. It wasn't until Issei offered Sona his arm to escort her in that she finally came back to reality. As they entered the building, a commotion was heard in the distance that caused Riaz and Sona both to sigh. "I bet we know who the root of all this is." Riaz spoke with a wry smile on her face. "Of course we do. It couldn't be anybody else after all." Sona replied, as Issei and his peerage looked on confused. There were two figures arguing a few feet in front of them. One was a man with dark skin that had a slight red tinge to it. His eyes were black and his hair a slight greenish blue. Sideways M-shaped markings adored his cheeks just below his eyes. He was wearing a deep red shirt with a blue jacket over top. Black slacks protecting his legs. The other, a woman with long blonde hair. Her pink eyes shielded by glasses. She was wearing a blue robe-like jacket that reminded the group of the style coat merchants used to wear. There was even the ruffled maroon ascot to go with it. "Zephyr." Riaz and Sona groaned when they saw the man. He was harassing the girl with vulgar language. "Oh come on Sakvara, all you need to loosen up is a good and rough pounding. Ain't no need for you to stay a geeky virgin any longer, and I know you'd be hooked on my co. Do you have a death wish, Zephyr?" She cut him off with a cold glare. "Seriously? A virgin bitch like you is turning me down? The beep is wrong with you? A low-class cretin like yourself couldn't get a lady like me, even if you drugged her, Zephyr." The girl identified as Sakvara taunted coolly. "Why you bitch?" Zephyr yelled, a fist being pulled back to strike her. At that point Issei stepped in, but he wasn't alone. Another teen stepped up beside him. This second male had dark hair that stuck out on one side, but other than that looked pretty nice and formal in a simple tuxedo. Issei just glared at the teen that they had stopped from assaulting the blonde. His draconic energies rolling off of him with a threatening intent which caused the darker-skinned boy to recoil slightly. Issei's companion in ending the argument had a hand wrapped around Zephyr's wrist, a vice grip causing the hand to twitch as the blood flow was cut off. "The beep do you assholes want?" He tried to taunt Issei and the newcomer. Issei just sighed and focused his glare on Zephyr, whose body suddenly went limp, causing him to be held up, but the wrist that the other male still had a hold of. "You know better than to treat women that way." The boy spoke before tossing Zephyr. Even though it was a simple toss, Issei could tell there was a lot of power behind the movements as Zephyr was thrown across the room and into a seat. That promptly broke and collapsed beneath him. But Zephyr dealt with. Issei turned to the blonde and offered a hand as he noticed in their rush to defend her, she had been thrown to the ground. "I'm sorry about that. Are you alright?" "Yes, thank you for the assistance." "Thank you too, Serg. If Zephyr causes any more problems let me know, alright?" The now identified Serg spoke. Issei nodded in agreement. "I will now, I don't recall ever meeting you before," Sakvara mentioned as she turned to Issei. At that point Riaz and Sona decided to make themselves known, offering greetings to their friends. Though in Ria's case she greeted Serg as family since the two are cousins. "To answer your question, Sakvara, this is Issei. He is the one the news has been talking about lately. The new head of the Lucifuge clan." "Okay then, so you're my long-lost cousin that was recently found," Serg commented after hearing Sona's explanation. "Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you, Lord Lucifuge," Sakvara stated as she gave a polite bow to Issei. "It's a pleasure meeting the two of you as well. Also please just call me Issei. I'm still not used to being the head of the Lucifuge family yet." "Then you may just call me Sakvara. We're cousins so I don't mind what you call me, Issei." Sakvara and Serg replied, though Serg offered his hand for a handshake as he spoke. "Anyway, I have to ask, why is it you were the one to answer my question, Sona? How do you already know him?" "Well, that's a long story. Suffice it to say, one of the announcements that will be made tonight will be my explanation as to how I already know him, Sakvara." Around that time, Issei was finally spotted by another of the guests to the meeting. Azazel was with Surziches from the start and Vali wasn't allowed to stray too far from them until Issei arrived to distract him. "Oh, there you are, Issei," Vali called out as he walked up to the group. "Vali, how have things been since the break started?" Issei questioned, wanting to know what his gaming rival has been up to. Same old. Training with Azazel and Baraquiel. "Oh, and I've made some progress into controlling JD." Vali responded, using the code name the two had come up with for Juggernaut Drive. Despite the fact they have transferred the rivalry from fighting to gaming, the two agreed to fight each other occasionally to keep their skills up. During the last battle Surziches and Azazel had to knock them out as they went a little too far and both of them triggered Juggernaut Drive. The reason that was a problem is that form is a berserker state. They give up all control in order to have unrestricted access to the full power they can draw from their sacred gears. They haven't seen each other since then, as their schedules haven't properly lined up again. But they did still find time to chat with each other via online gaming, which is how they came up with the label of JD. Mind if I ask what you two are talking about? Oh, and who are you? Sarah butted into the conversation. Well, I'm the current host to Albion, so I am the White Dragon Emperor. Issei is host to Drake, making him the Red Dragon Emperor. JD is a power we both have but can't fully use yet. Oh, and my name is Vali. No last name Vali? Sakvara asked as the group was curious. Outside of Issei, none of the teens knew Vali's last name. I have some deep-seated issues with my family, so I don't use my surname anymore. The conversation would have gone further, but Surziches had stepped up to the microphone that was placed in front of the four Satans. Everyone rushed to take a seat, postponing the talk for later. Everyone had rushed to take a seat when they noticed Surziches had stepped up to the microphone. Oh, there was no need for you all to rush to your seats. I was just wanting to announce that we are going to delay the conference a bit as a few VIP guests have yet to arrive. He spoke, his voice echoing around the room due to the mic. A few sighs were heard in response, as a couple of the peerage kings wanted the meeting to end quickly. One devil though saw it as his opportunity to get close to his targets. Thanks to his connections, he already knew all about Issei being set up in Kuo alongside Sona and Riaz. But he wasn't supposed to know that, so he ignored Issei for now in favor of talking to Riaz and Sona. Hello Sona. Hello Riaz. How are you two doing tonight? We're doing fine Diodora. How have you been? Riaz responded. Neither she nor Sona particularly liked the young man in front of them, but it was still common courtesy to be nice and return the question when asked. I've been well. Anyway, I have a question for you too. A few months ago I was in the human world when I got severely injured in a fight with a fallen angel. A young blonde nun happened to have been wandering by and healed me. I wanted to thank her for possibly saving my life, but when I went looking for her she was gone. After having her disappearance looked into, I learned she had been transferred to a church in Kuo. Do you want to know if we've seen someone matching that description around town? Riaz wondered as she listened to his question. Yes. If it helps, I learned that her name is Asia. Asia Argento. Sona and Issei went wide-eyed at the name, both recalling the nun that they had met just before Zophiel and Kalwarner were made part of Issei's peerage. I'm sorry to say this, but she was killed by a fallen angel for her sacred gear. I only know about this because it was a rogue fallen angel, and both Lady Leviathan and Lord Lucifer had asked my peerage to handle the situation. We did give her a proper burial though. Sona answered Diodora. He looked shocked for a moment before responding. I see, it's a shame I didn't get to thank her. Would you mind if I visited your territory and paid my respects at her grave at least? Sona gave a small nod, something about inviting him to Kuo was giving her a bad feeling though. At the same time Diodora was studying Issei and his peerage. Despite his connections to the old devil's faction, Issei was the only one he could find anything on. The young devil recognized Keko from Ria's peerage, having met her once before, but dismissed her as unimportant. He also recognized Bova as the son of Tannen, who was both a high-ranking devil and one of the Dragon Kings. With that in mind, he placed Bova a bit higher on his list in terms of who was more dangerous. Garen was relegated to a mid-tier threat between Bova and Keko after a bit of study. When his gaze came to the two former fallen angels in Issei peerage, his mind was active. He knew all about Asia's twilight healing, having originally planned to have her excommunicated from the church before claiming her as his own peerage member due to his fantasies. But things didn't work in his favor, so he wasn't able to move fast enough, so he expected that with the nun's death, her sacred gear was reincarnated with someone else. But he knew its power and was able to feel it on Zophiel. Diodora was curious as to how it came to be in her possession, but noted that she'd be a threat on the same level as Keko. That's to say, her ability to make light spears was the only dangerous thing about her, but her actual power level was so low that the light spears were not as dangerous as the magic from Garen or Bova's physical might. But it was the last member of Issei's peerage that interested him the most. The reason being that Issei's last peerage member, Kalwarner, never went anywhere without her sword. It was her most treasured possession, yet at the same time a beacon telling those who could feel its power what she used to be. The sword gave off a very small aura. That aura being holy in nature, as it was her weapon as a foot soldier in Heaven's army before the Great War. Since she was still able to use it, Diodora pieced together that she had fallen from heaven and thus still had a little bit of holy power as well. Adjusting himself, Diodora decided it was time to pull back and start plotting, having decided that he'd convince the old devils to let him have the one with the holy sword after he dealt with the devils currently living in Kuo like he was tasked. I'm sorry for staring, but I don't recognize any of you. He commented to Issei as he gestured to his peerage, hoping his statement would offset their suspicion at the fact he went quiet after receiving permission to visit Asia's grave. Forgive me for not introducing myself sooner. I am Issei Lucifuge, the current head of the Lucifuge clan. These are my peerage members. Issei responded, a fake smile on his face as he noticed Diodora's focus on Calawerner. He brushed it aside though since it wouldn't be right to cause a scene. Well met, Lord Lucifuge. I am Diodora Astereth, the current heir to the Astereth family. Lord Beelzebub is actually my older brother, but unlike the Gremory family, when Ajuka stepped up most of our family shunned him. Despite the extra info Diodora offered him, Issei didn't really acknowledge Diodora, only offering a hand for a quick handshake. He could tell that he was basically being dismissed without being dismissed, so after shaking hands, Diodora said he would see them again sometime before walking away. As he left, Sikvara and Serug came back to the trio from Kuo to continue talking. One of the topics that was brought up was why Issei was a clan head, when everyone knew the chances were good he would one day take the title of Satan just like his father. Serug was really curious about it, since his dream was to take that title too. Issei gave his best guess for why the Devil Council had wanted it set up this way. That being, the fact that Issei wouldn't challenge his father for the title, only claim it after the older devil retired or passed away. Which meant there would be a long gap of time between now and the time Issei becomes one of the 4 Satans. So the council, who cares more about noble pride than the devil's race itself, would want him to already have a title and position to come from when it happened. In other words, they want him to be a well-known noble figure already before he becomes a Satan, just to appease their sense of nobility. Issei just went along with Surzich's idea to bring the Lucifuge family into prominence as a pillar clan, because it was a way to eventually force change to the way the Devil's society is run. Though he also felt that it would help Sona in achieving her dream of a school for raiding games, since she'd have another important figure backing her. Eventually the VIP guest that they were waiting for arrived and Surzich's began the conference, welcoming all who were attending. He gave a brief speech about why this meeting in particular was going to be a special one, introduced the guests that the 4 Satans had invited, and began explaining certain presences at the conference, starting with Azazel and Vali. Now, as a few of you already know, we recently revised the ceasefire between the 3 factions. It is now a proper peace treaty, and we are working hand in hand with the angels and fallen angels. It is why I have invited Azazel, the governor of the fallen angels. Would you say a few words before I move on to the next guest? At that, Azazel stood and moved to the mic beside Surzich's. First, I say thank you for extending this invitation. Second, I'd like to address you young devils. Those of you that don't know me may be wary of things. That's perfectly fine, it's hard to adjust and change after centuries of distrust between the factions. But we are all working together now. You don't have to trust us. Not yet, let us earn your trust. But until we do earn that trust, I ask that you be open-minded and handle any issues you may have in a civil way. I give my word that we will extend that same courtesy to you, that's why I have asked my assistant here. He gestured to Vali before continuing. To be here with me tonight. He is a very special person in the supernatural world and a very powerful one at that. So to show you that we want to work together, I ask him here tonight to reveal himself. The moment Azazel said reveal, a set white wings with faded blue light, making up the feathers, slowly expanded from behind Vali's back. I am Vali. Due to family issues I do not claim my surname, so do not ask about it. If you don't want to call me Vali, then another way you can address me is as the White Dragon Emperor. Yes, I am the host of Albion now. I know this may be jumping the gun as they say, but one of the reasons I'm here to reveal myself is due to Lord Lucifuge over there. Vali said as he pointed out Issei. A few of you have already learned this, but Lord Lucifuge is host to Drag, making him the Red Dragon Emperor and my supposed rival to the death. But that is not true. He and I have talked it over, and we decided to put aside the feud between the dragons we are host to. We are friends and allies. If we, the host of the heavenly dragons, can ignore the hate and animosity that the previous generations of white and red dragon emperors had for each other, then devils, angels, and fallen angels can do the same. Surzich's let Vali's words wash over the young devils for a moment before he reined them back in as Vali and Azazel sat back down in their seats. The red-headed devil applauded their words before moving on and introducing their other guests. After finishing that task, he stepped back and let his fellow Satans give their own speeches to the young ones. Seraphil going last. Now, there are a few more announcements to be made to you all before this Youth Devils conference is over. However, this one is more of a congratulatory announcement so that you all can be aware of this news before it is released to the public. Lord Lucifuge, Sona, would the two of you stand? She spoke, her formal tone slipping when she addressed Sona. The two stood as a light was shined on both of them. At this point her formalities were gone as her excitement peaked. Issei, Sona, congratulations on your engagement. She practically screamed into her microphone before rushing towards the two in an attempt to squeeze them with bear hugs. Surzich's moved towards them as well, causing some confusion as most thought he was going to remind Seraphil that it was a formal occasion still. But he instead joined in the hug. Between the two Satans, Issei and Sona were struggling to breathe as they had bone-crushing strength in their hugs. Ahem, for those of you that are confused as to why Lord Lucifer is also hugging the two, I'd like to say you need to pay more attention to the news. Lord Lucifuge is his long-lost son that was kidnapped from his cradle years ago. Ajuka spoke, specifically glaring at Zephyr, who was really the only one confused at Surzich's actions. Eventually Surzich's and Seraphil were pried off the two teens and made to return to their seats so the last segment of the conference could go on. This time Ajuka was the Satan at the mic, asking each of the peerage kings to stand and turn and state their dream. Zephyr, Sikvera and Diodora all gave the standard, "I want to take over as head of my family," and lead them to greatness answers for what their dreams were. Even Ria's dream was a variation on that, though hers wasn't just to lead the Gremory clan, but devilkind itself to greater things. "I want to take a spot as one of the 4 Satans," Serg announced, pride and conviction evident in his voice. "It's a long and hard path, but I heard the determination in your voice. I wish you luck, Serg," Ajuka said with a smile, having already realized that Serg would one day achieve that goal. "As for you young Citri, what is your dream?" he inquired of Sona when she stood. Though Ajuka already knew, since he was close friends with her sister after all. "I want to improve the devil's strength overall by building a school for raiding games. Not just for the high-ranking families, but all devils." Serg, Sikvera and Riaz all smiled as they applauded their friend's dream. Diodora snorted and rolled his eyes, not believing she could do it or that it would matter in the slightest, but refrained from voicing those doubts. Zephyr, however, was calling her out, rudely saying it was a stupid and worthless dream. At that, Issei couldn't keep silent. Standing up and unleashing his grip on his power slightly, he let it cause the rude boy to cower in fear before he spoke. "It's an admirable dream, so don't you dare laugh at it. Besides, I'll help make sure it comes true. If I can't use my power to help her achieve her dreams, then how the hell will I achieve mine of becoming one of the 4 Satans and take over as chief of foreign affairs?" he challenged. Daring anyone to speak out against Sona, despite the fact that most of the devils in the room weren't against her dream. Though everyone in the room knew his power would grow to the point he would easily be able to take a spot as one of the 4 Satans, so they felt he'd easily be able to help Sona with her goal. "Just like Serg, I can feel the determination from both of you. Once again, I wish you luck in your endeavors," Ajuka commented, combining his responses to Sona and Issei. The two nodded their heads at his words before returning to their seats. Ajuka did as well, and it was quiet for a moment before the last of the 4 Satans, Falbium, stepped up to speak. "As we draw closer to the end of this gathering, we now come to the final announcement of the evening. In order to help you all grow, it has been decided that a few of the restrictions that young devils have shall be lifted off of you all. From now on, you and your peerage may be given a task from we Satans directly, instead of it being run through the Devil Council. You all will also have the restrictions about dealing with stray devils in your territories lifted. The third and final change will be that you are allowed to have your own raiding games. In order for you to fully grasp how raiding games work, we have arranged a few between you all. Once those have all finished, you will be allowed to issue challenges to each other, and after a year you will be allowed to challenge any devil to a raiding game." Albium was silent as he expected someone to question him about the rules being changed for them. But he was surprised to see Volley speak up instead. "If I may. After all of the prearranged raiding games are finished, would you add me to the list of people that may be challenged? It lets us get a better feel each other's strength." "I see no issue with that. If someone wishes to challenge you, they can." Albium responded before things went quiet again. Patiently he waited until Serg voiced his concern. "You say you've already arranged raiding games between us. How so, and against who?" "Well, before I can answer that, I have to explain how these changes are going to work for young Sona and Lord Lucifuge. As they have special circumstances that lead to them being part of each other's peerage, they cannot face each other in a raiding game. Because of how unbalanced it is, if you have a game against one of their peerages, you will not face the other. For example, the first game to be held will be Diodora versus Issei. Win or lose, Diodora cannot have a game against Sona's peerage. That way you do not battle either of them twice. As for how the games are arranged, you all will have 5 games. As it is right now, we only have your first game set up, so a proper list will be sent to you all within the next few days. The first games are Diodora versus Issei, as I said before, Riaz versus Ikvera, and Serg versus Zephyr. But the raiding games," explained Falbium, settled back down in his chair so Surziches could stand up and do the closing speech. The moment he was done, Serg and Sikvera rushed back over to Issei and Sona, both offering their congratulations for the engagement. Though Sikvera was slightly stiff about it as her worry for her friend seeped into her voice. "It's alright, Sikvera. I'm not in this engagement against my will." "Wait, what are you talking about?" Serg asked, unaware of the term Sona set with her parents about her engagement. "I had an engagement once, but I weaseled out of it after beating him in chess. After that I made an agreement with my parents that I would only marry someone that could best me in chess. Issei is the first person and only person to do that. I see. That's why you two are engaged and why you told Sakvara earlier that there would be an announcement to explain why you already knew him. Even without that agreement I would still marry Issei. Besides, he had no idea about the contract with my parents until much later. Here's an idea. Why don't we all head over to the Lucifuge family's mansion so we can tell you guys how it happened and catch up? It's been a while since we've all gotten together anyway. Ria suggested, having been planning to visit Issei's new territory herself. Sakvara and Serg both agreed to the idea, and the 5 peerage kings, plus their entourage, left the meeting hall to travel towards the Lucifuge territory. While that was going on, Diodora was contacting a few of his acquaintances, namely a devil by the name of Shalba. He explained the situation to the older devil. Alright then. We'll come up with a plan and inform you about it later. For now your objective is to prepare for the game with that brat. Don't kill his 2 fallen angel peerage members. I want them as a replacement for that stupid nun. You mean the nun with twilight healing? Why? She's dead. Apparently a fallen killed her and now one of the 2 in his peerage has it. The other seems to be an angel that fell but still has a small amount of holy power. I'm going to enjoy breaking that bitch. We'll see. For now you just need to be on standby. I can't wait to see the look on Serzich's face when his precious firstborn is dead. Since Diodora was too wrapped up in his fantasies, he never even noticed the nearby presence listening in on the conversation and recording it for later. The moment they sensed it was over, the figure left, a strand of white hair falling to the ground as the only proof they were ever there. Meanwhile. Welcome to the Lucifuge home. Issei offered his companions as he led them to the East Wing's room for entertaining guests. Privately he called it a small party room. Riaz and Sona dismissed their peerages, telling them they could go do what they wanted now. Issei did the same, a smile on his face as Garen left for his alchemy room, Zophiel in tow. Kalwarna returned to her room and Bova decided he wanted to relax, so he returned to normal, letting his dragon wings out as he left to go fly for a bit. Keko curled up in a chair by a fireplace. Issei had decided to add to the room to give it a more homely feel. Sakvara and Serg told their peerages to relax and do whatever, but didn't fully dismiss them since they weren't sure how long they'd be. It was almost 2 years ago now that we first met. Issei started, intending to tell them about how they grew close. It's hard to believe it's been that long. I remember our first chess game though. Yeah, school hadn't even started yet so everyone was waiting in the courtyard. You were accepting challengers when Mitsuda and Motohama told me about it. I remember they were concerned since that was back when your powers were going haywire. It wasn't until you and Ajuka revived me that they settled after all. Issei and Sona went back and forth. It was clear to see they cared for each other, both more focused on reminiscing with each other than actually telling Serg and Sakvara the story. It took Ria snapping her fingers in front of them to get their attention back on the group. Right, sorry. So basically, as you know, I was kidnapped from my cradle. The person that did it managed to alter my genetics so that my devil powers were dormant and I would seem to be just a regular human. But I got a sacred gear and it woke my abilities. The problem is my powers started fighting with the sacred gear over which would be my dominant power and it was tearing my body apart. Anyway, his friends were concerned for him since it was an unknown illness and he was late to school. But after he assured them he was okay, they told him about the fact I was accepting challengers at chess. So I sat down and played a game with her. We first met playing chess. On top of that, you beat me. I was shocked, especially since it meant, according to my parents, you were my fiance at that moment. But since you were supposed to be a normal human with no connection to the supernatural, I decided to give it some time and see what kind of person you were before telling you. Well, at least as far as you knew. It wasn't until you decided you could trust me enough to reveal that you were a devil that I told you I already knew about the supernatural. But you didn't tell me about the engagement thing. It wasn't until you tried to get Mama to help stabilize my powers that I found out about it. Ria snapped her fingers at the 2 again, though she rolled her eyes at the 2. Issei and Sona shared a look before deciding to drop the small details and told their story about how things got to be where they are now. Ria's joining in any time something involving her or her peerage was talked about. In the end, Serg and Sakvara had been caught up on events with their friends, but neither one had gotten to talk about what's been going on with them, as the talk was done more as a way to get them used to Issei and possibly start a friendship with him. Man, it's gotten pretty late. Serg said as he looked at the clock. I was hoping to catch up with you too, but we spent all that time letting you get to know Issei. Riaz pouted, though it didn't matter too much to her since she was just happy to see Issei was making friends with her friends. You guys are welcome to stay the night. I know Sona is, and I bet Riaz wants to see more of this place, so she's going to stay and explore. Not this time. I've got a few things I need to prepare for. Sakvara told him, shaking her head though she did mention that she'd like to visit again when she stood up. Sarag on the other hand took Issei up on the offer, planning to spend a couple days getting close with his cousin. Issei saw Sakvara to the door as he had his head butler Sebastian show Sarag and his peerage to rooms they could stay in. After that, Issei moved to his room unsurprised to see Sona hadn't waited for him and already gotten ready for bed. Sighing, Issei got into his pajamas before crawling into bed beside Sona. He kissed her forehead as his arm snaked around her. "Good night, Sona." "Night, Ice." The next morning Issei found that he had more guests than he did the night before. Or rather he was hosting a meeting because of a need for secrecy. After recording a copy of Diodora's conversation with Shalba, Vali had approached Azazel and shared his find with the fallen angel. Azazel in turn shared it with the four Satans. Because they had to handle things carefully to avoid tipping the scales and showing their hand to the old devil's faction, the faction leaders had decided to deal with it in secret. So when Issei and Sona sat down to eat breakfast after seeing off Sarag, they found company in the form of Ajuka, Surziches, Azazel, and Vali. The White Dragon Emperor shared his find with the two, who weren't really surprised. Issei explained why they weren't shocked to hear the news. "Honestly, I figured he was up to something. Last night when he approached us, he may have had a valid reason because he was asking if we knew anything about a person he was looking for, but the entire time Sona was answering his question he was staring at my peerage, and I especially Zophiel and Kalwerner. Before coming I spoke with Michiel about a theory I had, after seeing Diodora's peerage if I'm right, he's only interested in them because Zophiel now has Twilight Healing, and Kalwerner for a reason that has Michiel pretty mad for once." Azazel commented. He continued on by mentioning that Kalwerner used to be a foot soldier for the angels, but she had fallen shortly after he did. She chimed in mentioning she fell because she raped and abused by a devil. Despite no longer being welcome in heaven because of the Great War, she was allowed to keep her sword so she could at least defend herself. Issei wanted to ask how Diodora figured that out and why it mattered, but the moment he went to open his mouth, it hit him. As he realized it, Issei felt his blood beginning to boil. His friend was being targeted by a sick and twisted bastard. Diodora has been going around and causing holy maidens from the church to be excommunicated so that he can claim them for his peerage, hasn't he? He wants Kalwerner because he realized she used to be an angel. "I'm going to crush him and I'm going to enjoy every moment of it." Sona, for her part, was just as pissed off as Issei, but she was shocked when she heard he was going to make it personal with Diodora. Issei may be protective to a fault, but he was not normally so vindictive. Though she put the concern about that aside as Surziches started speaking. "Of course. We have to be careful about this, so we'll let things continue as planned, but since they're certainly setting a trap, we'll have to set one of our own. But Diodora is pretty powerful, and so is Shalba. If he shows you wouldn't be able to win. Luckily we've got 2 weeks to prepare." Issei nodded, a serious look in his eyes as he turned to Vali. "Remember what we were talking about the other day? Go for it." Vali nodded and left the room to summon a few more guests. Surziches and Sona were confused, but Issei ignored their questions about it as he called not just his peerage, but his 2 familiars as well. After explaining the situation to them, Vali returned to the room. "Keko, Kalwerner, you two are going to be training with a few friends of Vali's. He'll be going with you, Keko, so he can help explain things better and soothe things over, but after that he'll probably be joining me. Bova, go to your dad and ask him to train you. Garen, I'm not really sure we know anyone that could help you, so I have no idea who can train you. As for me, Tiamat, we're stepping things up. That means Zophiel will be with us, since I have no doubt I'll need her healing at the end of the day." Issei ordered as he looked at each member of his peerage. He didn't assign anything to Sona because he figured she would already be going to her sister for more training anyway. But he was surprised to see Ajuka speak up. "I know this may seem strange since he's my younger brother, but if he's truly working with the old devil faction he needs to be stopped. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a master magician. If you need someone to teach you, Garen, I'll do it." The next person to speak was Bova. Considering someone was targeting his fellow peerage member, he was significantly pissed as well. Enough so that he was not just willing to train with his father but eager to. "I've got a better idea, boss. Rather than continue your secret training with Tiamat, why don't the 2 of you join my dad and I? The 2 of them working together to train us. We'll reach the next level so quickly that when it comes time to destroy those that target us, you won't even need to use the boosted gear on them." Issei thought about it and nodded his head, finding it to be a fair point and a great idea. 2 teachers forcing him to work beyond his limits would be perfect. Especially if Vali joined in after getting things settled between Keko and the person he intended to have her learn from. Sona, however, was confused about the secret training Bova had mentioned that Issei was doing with Tiamat already. But she figured that could be discussed later as she stood up and activated her magic circle. "I'm going to see if Big Sister is willing to help me." Issei nodded at that as he stood as well, moving to plant a kiss on Sona's forehead before stepping back so she could leave to find her sister. Bova moved from the wall he was leaning against to stand next to him as Tiamat strolled over to them and Zophiel stood up from her seat to join the group. Nodding at everyone else, Issei let Bova teleport them to his father's home to see about getting Tannen to join in on the fun. Baron sighed as he stood. Well, this should be interesting at least. I've heard a lot about you, Lord Beelzebub, so I look forward to learning from you. He gave a slight bow as Ajuka stood as well, the two following Issei's lead and leaving. That left Keko, Kalwerner, Surziches, Azazel, and Vali sitting in the dining room. Azazel, having knowledge on Vali's friends, already realized what Issei meant when he told Vali to go for it. Turning to Surziches he spoke. Before Vali's guests get here, you need to hear this as well. With Vali's input he explained the situation behind Kaneko's older sister Kuroka. Thanks to Vali having found the proof to back it up, Surziches had to sigh. Kaneko and Kuroka used to have a high-class devil for a master, though only Kuroka was part of the devil's peerage. However, as far as anyone knew, she went berserk one day and killed their master before running away and abandoning Kaneko. At the time it was a certain power that was blamed by someone claiming that it using that power had driven the girl insane for some reason. But with the evidence Vali had brought, he learned the truth. Kuroka had been letting their master experiment on her, but upon finding out he was going to do the same to her little sister, she killed him. While it wasn't enough to exonerate her from the crime, it was enough to drop the title of stray devil so she wouldn't be hunted down anymore. Despite this, as an older sibling himself, Surziches understood why she killed their master, especially since from the diary Vali had provided as evidence he learned that the experiment was likely to kill Kaneko in the process. Rising from his position, Surziches left in order to introduce the newly acquired evidence to the Devil Council and get her status as a stray revoked, even though all that really meant was she would no longer be hunted down. Because neither Kalwerner nor Kaneko left the room, they both heard the story. Kaneko had mixed feelings about the fact that Issei and Vali were planning to explain it to her and give her Kuroka a chance to see her again. Mostly because she was deeply hurt by the fact her sister had essentially abandoned her. Sure, now that she was older, having heard the story, she could understand the reasoning behind the fact that her older sister left. But that didn't make it okay, nor did it stop the hurt. Kalwerner, in a gesture of comfort, placed a hand on the white-haired girl's shoulder and squeezed gently. It was her way of showing that Kaneko had friends that cared and would be there for her if she needed it. Azazel and Vali, on the other hand, just sat there. They were a neutral party in the situation because they both had ties to Kaneko and her older sister Kuroka. Meanwhile, Issei and Bova had no problems talking Tannen into helping them train for the upcoming raiding game. Though they did suspect it was because Tiamat was helping. After all, while they were making their way out to the training grounds that Tannen liked to use, the two both mentioned it had been far too long since they last got the chance to talk. Zophiel had chosen to stay back and away from the practice field they were using, so she didn't risk getting hurt by stray attacks or debris that were scattered about from the ferocity she knew was coming. After all, she and Bova were the only two people that knew about Issei's secret training with Tiamat, and that was only because she had to heal him after every session. Though she guessed that healing Issei and Bova every day would increase the speed she could heal wounds at, or maybe even allow her to heal more dangerous and possibly life-threatening wounds. Issei and Bova stood at one end of a massive barren stretch-on at the base of a mountain. The other end was where Tannen stood, while Tiamat had taken dragon form and was flying above them. Before we get started, I need to ask. Are you going to do any magic training, Master? Tiamat's voice echoed from above as she looked down on Issei and Bova. Issei shook his head as he responded. Kinda. Also, you may be my familiar, but please just call me Issei. I don't really like being called Master. Tannen quirked an eyebrow at that before asking what Issei had meant by Kinda. The answer Issei gave him is that he wasn't going to work on anything involving his devil magic or ice elemental magic. All magic he would work on is the dragon magic he has access to as the host of Drag. So you mean you'll be working on dragon seals and aura techniques at least? Seals, yes. It would be handy to have a few things hidden in a seal that I could pull out in an emergency. Or no. I've been doing aura manipulation with Drag when I sleep. That's why I've felt your aura fluctuating at night. Tiamat yelled at his words. But Bova just had a questioning look on his face. Tannen rolled his eyes at his son's ignorance, having forgotten that he raised his son to be a brawler and didn't bother to teach him about these other draconic abilities. Tiamat, have already figured that to be the case, took the chance to explain. When people talk about magic, they talk about the kinds that anyone can learn. But dragon magic, it can't be taught to anyone without at least a drop of dragon's blood in their veins. As Drag's host, mace to him. Issei is half dragon, even after being revived by his evil pieces. Some of what is referred to as dragon magic isn't really magic, so much as it is a power that only we can tap into. What I mean by that is aura. Every living being has its own aura. You can look at it like a glass of water. Dragons are the only ones that have enough aura to fill said glass. Every other race only has a drop or two, and so they can't do anything with it. Issei took over, giving Bova the explanation that Drake gave him. But he continued and gave examples of what can be done with aura. Everything you can do with aura is done through aura manipulation, which makes it tangible so you can do what you want with it. When I train with Drake, I manipulate my aura into armor to protect me from his attacks. But I can also create weapons with it. According to him, I may even be able to use it to affect the weather after I've trained with it enough. At that point Tannen took over the conversation, reminding everyone they were here to train. But Tiamat promised that at the end of the day she'd work with Issei on learning to use dragon seals. Issei nodded as they began to fight, planning to use today to find where the two teens' limits were. As he clashed with one of Tannen's fists, Issei figured this was the start of his karma for not talking with Keko about the training he'd set her up for. Meanwhile, Eren studied Ajuka intensely. Making sure he committed every important detail to memory, he closed his eyes. Taking a deep breath, he followed what he had seen, attempting to recreate the spell he was being shown. Ajuka had given him the calculations needed to cast it, but without seeing it for himself, Garen was unable to copy it. Unlike the others who were likely to train through pushing themselves to the next level through fighting, Garen was growing stronger by copying Ajuka's work. He didn't need to question why Issei's magic training was different, as he already knew the answer. Dragon magic is learned through trial and error. Devil magic is shaped by desire and strengthened by emotions. But all other forms of magic. For all other magic users, they could only grow stronger by learning new spells. The power of a spell was determined by the amount of magic used, and a mage could increase their magic container's size by learning new spells. In other words, his growth was dependent on the number of spells he could do the calculations for. Luckily, he could take a look at another person's calculations and run through them in his head, confirming them mentally to use a new spell. Of course, when he found a spell he really liked, the calculation was recorded in his grimoire for safekeeping. But at the pace Ajuka was showing him new spells, he was already planning to make a second grimoire to contain them all. Considering my equation of military supremacy ability that lets me control pretty much everything through the use of equations and formulas, I have never found myself needing a grimoire. Especially since my ability also lets me instantly see and understand the calculations needed to control everything. But I do have to say, yours seems to be of a very high quality. Whoever made it must be gifted. I did. Along with the staff I use to create barriers when I need more time to cast my spells. Eren responded, showing the green-haired devil his collapsible staff along with his grimoire. While the stave wasn't anything to sneeze at since it was crafted with extreme care and detail, it was nowhere near as impressive as his grimoire. But his grimoire was unique. Thanks to pop culture influencing things, everyone expects a grimoire to be a tome of some kind. Yet that's not exactly true. Wands, staves, tomes, crystal balls, even jewelry, they were all different forms of grimoires. Anything that is used to channel magic is a grimoire. Garen's was unique. Thanks to his impressive innate ability with magic, he was able to craft a grimoire that could be separated into multiple parts, each one able to do something different. Granted, he only knew how to do it thanks to his grandfather Nicholas Flamel telling him it was possible. You have an impressive talent for magic to be able to use so many different types of magic and rapidly grasp the more complicated facets of crafting these spells I've shown you. It's extraordinary to say the least. I would even go so far as to say you have the potential to grow strong enough to rival even the greatest of mages. Ajuka told him as Garen showed the 3 sections of his grimoire and explained what each one was capable of. To start, he had a slightly longer than normal wand. Its use was as a focus for his magic, amplifying it and allowing him to cast stronger spells. The next piece was a gemstone that was being hidden as a pendant. It was a type of gemstone known as materia. Its function as part of his grimoire, it provided him the ability to use spells he didn't have an affinity for. In regards to Garen, it was used to allow him to cast fire and ground elemental spells, summoning magic, teleportation magic, transformation magic, and even sealing magic. Except this was only possible due to the fact his materia piece was clear. The color of a materia piece denoted what it was capable of. Even though it was true that all colors enabled elemental magic, clear was the only color that allowed for every element to be cast. Clear has no special affinities, so it could be used for any kind of magic. Blue allowed for illusion and transformation magic on top of providing water-based affinities. Red was the color of fire-based affinities and strengthening magic. Yellow granted earthen affinities, summoning magic, and protection magic, while green provided wind affinities, summoning magic, teleportation magic, and sealing magic. White materia was used for white magic and granted both wind and water affinities. Of course, that meant its counterpart black materia allowed black magic and both fire and earth-based abilities. But the last part of his grimoire was the most useful one for the case of training. The part of his grimoire that actually recorded the calculations needed to cast spells. His bracelet that was clasped on his right wrist. Imbued in the platinum it was made of, was a special spell that recorded the calculations for the spells he wanted to store in his grimoire. Once removed and attached to his wand it acted as clasp that would hold the materia gemstone. Together all three pieces became a scepter. It's a shame you've already stored so many spells in it. To recreate a second grimoire like this one it'll take you at least a month for each section, and that's only if you have the materials on hand, especially since they have to be refined a certain way to avoid disrupting another part's function. I actually found these materials in the old alchemist workshop in the Lucifuge mansion. It's been a week since Issei became the head of the clan, there is no way that is a new grimoire that only took you a week to create. Well, I did have a little bit of help refining the materia. But the platinum for the bracelet and the ash wood for the wand had already been treated and refined for use in crafting. Not to mention I didn't think it was possible to split up a grimoire like this till I mentioned the materials to my grandfather. Ajuka was silent at that, especially once he remembered that Garen was the grandson of the great wizard Nicholas Flamel. Nodding his head at Garen's words he sat down, questioning just how far Garen's skills would grow through their training. Meanwhile, once again. Damn it, Seraphol. That was really cold. Sona shouted at her older sister. The moment she appeared in Seraphol's office the older devil cleared her schedule for the day, ready to spend time with her little sister. But she was surprised when Sona demanded to train with her. After hearing Sona's explanation she agreed to the training and the two moved outside to the Leviathan's private beach. Since they specialized with water-based magic, it was obvious that they'd train in an area that kept the two supplied with water. But Sona was unprepared for her older sister's training. The older devil had decided to showcase just how large the gap between them was, attacking Sona with one of her higher-tiered spells, causing the glasses-wearing devil to be encased in a block of ice. But Sona had broken out rather easily, only to be driven into shock by icy cold water. Water so cold it should have become ice instantly. Sorry Sona, I just wanted to make sure you understood just how harsh this is going to be. Upon hearing Seraphol's response Sona nodded, her mouth set in a grim line as she activated her magic seal to retaliate. Hoping her actions would show she didn't care how tough her training was. Meanwhile, last one. Vali's friends that he called had finally arrived. Because he wasn't too worried about things between Keko and Kuroka, he just introduced the two he had called for and left, Azazel following him, as he could tell that Kalwarner would be able to help Keko fight through her issues with Kuroka. But after their departure it was an awkward silence. Keko and Kuroka were staring at each other, Kalwarner was looking over the short white-haired girl with concern in her eyes, and the person he had called for to train Kalwarner was looking on the entire situation but being respectful by staying silent. Eventually the silence was broken as Keko spoke just one word. Why? Kuroka gave a sigh as she looked at her younger sister. I assume you heard why I killed our former master, so you're asking why I left you behind. Well, I knew we'd be on the run, like. No. I understand that part. Why does it still hurt to know you chose to leave? Why does it still hurt to have been left behind? Kuroka's eyes widened at the shout from the white-haired girl that interrupted her reasoning. She reached out a hand towards her younger sister, intending to pull her into a hug and comfort her, but the white-haired girl flinched away and ran off. Kalwarner stood to follow though she turned to the two guests that Vali had called for and spoke a quick apology. I apologize for how things have gone so far. I'll try to calm her down, but I don't think she'll be willing to do much with you today. Kuroka let out a heavy sigh, disappointed that things weren't going to be as easy as she hoped. Her companion that was brought in to help Kalwarner shook his head and chuckled at her. Nothing worth it is ever done easily. Oh, shut up, Arthur. She muttered, unwilling to agree even though she knew it was true. Since his aptitude for learning new spells was extremely high, it had only taken a week for Ajuka to teach Garen all the spell he had intended for the team to learn. But with another week before the raiding game against Diodora, he felt there was more to do. So after pressing the older devil about it, Garen's training had switched gears from increasing his magic pool and spell list. Now he was getting battle experience. By that we mean Ajuka would give him a scenario, and Garen would have to use spells that fit the rules he was given, while sparring with the older devil, who would occasionally call out and change the rules. We're in a scorching hot desert fighting one-on-one, but there's an army on either side. Large-scale attacks would harm your allies as well. Ajuka shouted to him from across the field they were sparring in, having fallen back after finding that Garen's spells were devastating in close-range situations. Thinking about the new rules he had been given, Garen decided ice and water elemental magic was off the table, as the heat of a desert would make them useless for anything other than massive spells that covered a large area. Even though it was a fast decision, he was still too slow in thinking of his counter, and Ajuka had taken advantage using summoning magic to create a human-sized clay golem. But Garen didn't know that Ajuka had layered his spells, so that not only had he summoned the clay construct, he had reinforced its defenses and given it a speed boost. The green-haired devil had almost given it a power boost as well, but decided against it after a moment, choosing instead to rapidly fire off a few spells to give his golem a chance to get close. This was because he knew the golem wouldn't be able to get a hit off on the dark-haired teen if he didn't use a few spells to distract the boy. But he was shocked to see Garen doing something new in response. Rather than waste precious time defending himself, the blue-eyed teen cast a spell to increase his speed, dodging the magic that had been flung his way. But as he moved, another spell was being cast, a thin lance of flames appearing in Garen's hands as he jumped. Rotating his hands as he pumped his strength into them, he finished the spell, causing the lance to become a flaming scythe that he brought down on the clay golem. Normally a move like that would have been a finishing attack, but Garen wasn't satisfied, and instead of just dissecting the golem in two down the middle, he kept the momentum going as he spun, cleaving the golem's head off before the return stroke severed its body at the waist as well. The grin came to Ajuka's face as he started to lose a bit of his composure and enjoy himself. Letting go of his tight control just a bit, he fell into the rhythm of battle, creating a dozen golem constructs before telling Garen it was now himself versus an army for his battle scenario, this time placed in a tundra. That's more like it. Glacial Gatling. The teen called out, letting his magic form several decently sized magic circles appear behind him. But that was just the beginning. As he pointed towards the center of the group of golems charging his way, the magic circles started launching pillars of ice at an amazingly fast rate. The size of those pillars was nothing to sneeze at either, since they were easily 6 feet long javelins of monstrously thick ice. When the dust settled, Ajuka and Garen both had to gasp at the sight. Not a single shard of Ajuka's golems remained, yet the spears of ice Garen's attack had launched were still perfectly fine, not even a hint of scratch or crack on them. Sharing a look, Ajuka and Garen slowly gained maniacal grins as they returned to their mock battle, which was becoming more and more extreme with every spell cast. Hot damn, this is fun. Garen called out, the adrenaline pumping through his body, giving him the feeling of exhilaration. The green-haired devil that was helping him train couldn't help but agree with the young mage. Meanwhile, Halwarner had managed to calm Keko down and get her to agree to at least join them outside while she worked with Arthur for her own training. The white-haired girl wasn't sure she was ready to do anything with her sister, nor was she sure Kuroka could teach her anything that would be useful as a rook, since as far as she remembered the older Nekomata was a bishop. Over the course of the first 3 days she slowly started to respond to her older sister, something Halwarner noticed despite her own training. After opening up just a bit with Kuroka, the young catgirl almost lost her temper when the older catgirl called her by her birth name, which is Shirin. Luckily she managed to calm herself and explain the fact she never wanted to be called that name again. Ever since Ria's brother defended me from the Devil Council for your actions, I have been Keko. I had to leave Shirin behind in order to move on. That name is not me. Not anymore. Kuroka understood. The council had ordered that her little sister leave every aspect of her former life behind and start again. Nodding slowly, she apologized for calling the white-haired girl by that name. After that they were cautious with each other, Keko all but shutting the older girl out and Kuroka trying to make Keko smile and look up to her like she had all those years ago. Things went on like this until Arthur and Halwarner had had enough. Neither one of them were really into the training, both being half-hearted in their duels as they kept an eye on the two. Damn it, I've had enough of this. Arthur mumbled as he walked up to the two Nekomatas. Halwarner followed him, intent on giving her 2 cents on the matter. Alright you two, enough is enough. We're supposed to be training and none of can fully focus because of this. Look, I understand it's hard for you Keko, and I'm not going to tell you how to feel or anything like that. But Kuroka is at least making an effort to make amends for leaving you. Meet her halfway. As for you, the blonde man said before turning to look at his companion and continuing his lecture. Kuroka, you can't make things go back to the way they were. Rather than focus on the past, you need to think about what's happening right now and what will happen in the future. Halwarner nodded along with him, noticing the frown from Kuroka and the look of frustration from Keko. She went to speak up, but Keko beat her to the punch. We're here to train, so fine. I'll stop completely ignoring her, so let's get to work. The white-haired girl said as she stood up and stretched, making to push Arthur and Halwarner back into the training grounds for a 3-way fight. But Halwarner didn't budge, instead she gave Keko a soft look. Issei arranged it so you'd be training with your sister, not Arthur and I. I can't. Kuroka's a bishop and I'm a rook. She doesn't have anything to teach me. The short girl replied, pointing out the fact her sister as a bishop was more of a magic user than a melee fighter like herself. But Kuroka was quick to correct that thought. That's not quite true, I can teach you senjutsu after all. Kaneko's eyes went wide as she heard the word, backing up and even hissing at the idea. Kalwarner wasn't sure what brought that on, as the short girl actively hid her Nekomata nature. The only reason anyone knew she was a Nekomata was the fact that they could faintly sense it. Because Kaneko suppressed her instinct and cat-like nature so deeply, anyone who could sense it from her would just assume she's distantly related to one, rather than a Nekomata herself. Look, I know that you heard Senjutsu being blamed by the Devil Council for why I murdered our former master. However, those idiots don't know how to use Senjutsu, let alone how it actually works. Hiroka told her younger sister, though she wasn't smiling just yet. After taking a breath, she continued to speak. Senjutsu is, well, they aren't exactly incorrect to call it dangerous to its wielder, but not in the way they think. It doesn't drive you insane or anything like that. It's a power that was created in an attempt to replicate a special ability of dragons. To explain what she meant by that, Hiroka had to give an example for how Senjutsu works. First, she stated that all living beings have an aura, even non-sentient life has an aura. But not all life forms can access or use their aura, the only ones to do so are dragons. If we look at our bodies like a cup, dragons are the only ones to have more than a drop or two of aura inside them. Well, Senjutsu was created as a way for other species to be more like dragons. However, it is impossible for us to ever match a dragon by using Senjutsu. Kaneko, while listening, wasn't really interested as she was still on edge with the idea of learning Senjutsu, but Arthur and Kalwarner were paying attention, enough so that Arthur was willing to ask why it would be impossible to match a dragon with its use. Remember how I said we can look at our bodies like a cup? Well, that doesn't really apply to dragons. For example, let's say a human is a shot glass, which can't hold as much as say a regular cup, which is what a Nekomata would be in this case. Dragons. No matter what, even the dragon with the smallest amount of aura among dragons is a pond in size compared to the rest of us. You're saying we can only use Senjutsu to fill up our cup then, but because our cup is smaller than a dragon's we'd never be equal to one. What about if a person uses Senjutsu to overflow their cup? Arthur asked, a thoughtful look on his face. For your first question, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. As for your second question, well, that's why Senjutsu is dangerous to its wielder. If we try and fill the cup beyond what it can hold, the cup breaks. In other words, using Senjutsu to increase our aura too much is damaging to our body. Not to mention it's extraordinarily taxing to do for extended periods of time. Kaneko was still apprehensive about learning to use Senjutsu, but she was at least a little more willing to try, now that she had heard the truth about it. That apprehensiveness was more because of the fact that she understood how Senjutsu is performed, without Hiroka explaining it. A Senjutsu user is someone who manipulates the nature around them, drawing the aura out from their surroundings and linking it to their own. That meant a battle of wills between the person using the technique and the life that the aura is being drawn from. This is what the Devil Council meant by the fact that Senjutsu could drive a person insane, and Kaneko instinctively knew it. Meanwhile, again. I must say, she's done far better than I expected. The woman with piercing lilac-colored eyes spoke with a proud smile on her face. One that was both matched and exceeded by the smile on her companion's face. Yeah, Sona's making huge strides to keep up with Issei. But even I was surprised when after a few days she asked if I'd tag team train her with you, mother. The second woman spoke as they watched the now temporarily unconscious Sona. After Surziches and Azazel shared volleys find with Issei and his peerage, Sona knew that her fiance would do everything in his power to grow strong enough to stop the plans that Diodora was making with the elder devils that made up the old devil faction. So she was determined to grow stronger and stand beside him, hopefully as an equal. After all, he was risking his life, and she couldn't stand to stay behind on the sidelines of his fights any longer. So to be able to stand by his side, she had gone to her older sister for training. But after a couple days it was clear to the glasses-wearing girl that she needed her mother's help to control her eye magics. Approaching her mother, she begged the older devil to join in her training sessions. Despite the fact she and her husband are distant with their daughter, the lady of the Citri household really does love her. After hearing her youngest child beg to be trained to stay beside her future husband in all endeavors, she caved and began teaching her daughter the magics of her birth clan. You know, I don't think she even realizes just how much she's grown since meeting that young man. Lady Citri commented as she recalled the shock she felt upon seeing her youngest daughter using a teleportation spell without a magic circle, just becoming water before flashing away. Not that she was able to get out of the way of the attack that she was trying to avoid, which was her current reason for being on the ground out cold. I didn't know she could do that. I bet she doesn't know it either. If I'd have known about it, I might have tried teaching her how to mold her water magic into ice magic like mine. Seraphil stated, having guessed what her mother was referring to about Sona's growth. No. Water magic might be a strong core magic for the Citri, which is why you are both gifted with it, but Sona takes after me more than you did, which means she has a higher affinity for wind magic like my birth clan. Focusing on water magic like you would be putting all of her eggs in one basket, as the saying goes. I'll teach her wind magic, which should lend itself to helping her with the eye magic she has. After all, her Issei has the same ability my grandmother had. Once she gets used to the feeling of using wind magic, she'll be able to use her Issei to use wind currents as a focus for clairvoyance. The older devil explained to her first daughter. Seraphil for her part just nodded, as she knew no matter how strong Sona became, her specialty would never truly lie in combat. Sure, Sona could become a force to be reckoned with, but Sona was not born to be a fighter, not with her high level of intelligence. If their mother could help her learn to harness the power of her Issei magic, it would take her tactical abilities to new levels. As she finished that thought, a smile came to her face again as Sona stirred. Damn. I didn't quite make it. She mumbled as she sat up and rubbed her head. No, but do you know what you did? Seraphil said, her tone calm so as not to betray just how excited and proud she was. Sona just shook her head, waiting for a mini lecture on what she'd done wrong. Her eyes became the size of dinner plates when her mother told her that she had teleported without using a magic circle. Yes, it was very impressive to see you doing it almost instinctively. Now take a moment to regain yourself and meet me up on the balcony, my daughter. Since you take after me more than your sister, we're going to see if your affinity to wind magic is enough for me to teach you the basics. Meanwhile, last one. Tiamat walked away from the massive field where Issei and Tannen were still fighting. Every couple of days they'd stop fighting and join Zophiel for a bit of rest and some food. But this time was different. Issei and Bova had improved rapidly, to the point the last bout with the two Dragon Kings had lasted a day and a half before Bova collapsed. But it wasn't from the strain or being tired, no. Bova had taken a hit to the back of the head that gave him a concussion. Normally Tannen and Tiamat would have called for a break so Bova could be healed and Issei could get a bit of rest, but Issei was so close to the next level that he refused to back down. He had Tiamat grab Bova to be healed while he continued to face off against Tannen. Mostly because Tiamat had to hold back when attacking Issei as his familiar. But also because she would be able to get Bova to Zophiel's side for healing far more quickly than Tannen could. Issei ducked under a fist that was aimed at his head and rotated his body into a flip, bringing his leg down on top of the outstretched arm from Tannen. Smirking, the Dragon King dropped his arm and spun, swinging his other arm as he did, intending to slam it into Issei's side before the teen could right himself. But Issei had managed to do so and dug his heels in as he crossed his arms protectively in front of him. Neither one of them were surprised to see Issei sliding along the ground, though he didn't get pushed back as far as the dragon had expected him to be. Lunging forward again, Issei drew Tannen into a fist fight, neither one giving the other any ground as they pummeled each other. For every one punch one would land on the other, they would receive one in return. Moments later they were separated. Issei had taken a fist to the chin, several hits to the chest, one punch to the face that had broken his nose, and his arms were covered in bruises that were forming on top of other bruises from previous clashes with Tannen. Tannen was still standing strong, but Issei had worn him down more than his appearance suggested. It was also harder to tell if the dragon had any bruising since he was in dragon form. While he could keep going, he knew that he wouldn't be able to go much longer without having to use his full might. Issei at this point was panting heavily. He and Bova had been training almost non-stop, and at this point the only reason Issei was still standing was his stubborn determination to get at least one decent attack in on the dragon. As for Bova, well, he was unconscious after taking a blow to the back of the head from his father. Tiamat was busy taking the younger dragon back down the mountain path to Zophiel so he could be healed, as she was positive the hit to the head caused a concussion. HMPH. I'll admit, you've impressed me with your endurance, kid. But it isn't enough. You're still far too weak. The dragon spoke knowing that he'd be riling the teen up. It was on purpose after all. Issei was very powerful already, and that was without using the power he had as Drake's host. Tannen found himself scared of the full might Issei would one day have. Issei was almost a match for him with just the basic boost ability of his sacred gear and his exceptionally strong magic. But the brown-haired teen had yet to step up. He knew Issei could use his balance breaker, but the teen hadn't even thought to use it apparently. So he was going to force Issei to activate it by crushing Issei's pride until the anger gave way and caused him to use it. As Tannen continued to speak and rile Issei up, he was unaware of the surprise he was about to receive. While he knew that Tannen was doing it on purpose to make him made fight even harder than before, Issei was still getting frustrated. With all the potential he had, Issei was still too weak. Partner. I know you're tired of being weak. You have so many reasons to be strong after all. But you are forgetting something. I'm here with you. My power is your power. You want to be stronger? Then use my power. Brage spoke to him, egging him on towards the truth of the boosted gear. But that's because only the red dragon truly knew Tannen's reason for pushing the teen. Sure, he wanted Issei to fight with even more ferocity than before, it would help Issei improve faster. But the true reason the Dragon King was pushing Issei's buttons was because he knew that Issei's emotions would be the key. After all, with how things were playing out, Issei was developing a drive to become stronger than anything. With that drive he could change and evolve his balance breaker. Sacred gears respond to the desires of their wielders after all. Taking a deep breath after hearing Drake's words, Issei recalled the feeling of his balance breaker. Every time he's used it, something had felt incomplete. He recalled hearing that a balance breaker is supposed to be the apex of what a scared gear can do. Realizing what Drake was trying to tell him, Issei smirked as he glared defiantly at Tannen. Letting his power flow freely from his body, it pulsed brightly, causing Tannen to lose sight of him. Letting his power do as it wanted, Issei spoke out with Drake's voice layered over top of his. Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker. Crimson Imperial Scale Mail. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.